One of the most fascinating aspects of Frank Herbert's Dune saga is how each book expands the universe with new elements as humanity evolves. Dune Messiah introduces a couple of elements, one of them being the Ghola named Hayt. Before diving into that though, consider this your spoiler warning for Dune Messiah. At the start of the novel, there's a web of conspiracies already in motion, with multiple factions plotting against Paul Atreides. What makes this conspiracy particularly intriguing is the method they choose to try to take down the Emperor, who is himself a super being, the Kwisatz Haderach. How do you take down such an individual that knows everything, that will know everything, that sees past, present, future? All of these other advanced individuals, it's really cool, like the 4D chess that they're having to implement plans within plans to take down Paul and Elia, individuals that are just so powerful. So the Gola is their method of taking him down, of Paul's destruction, which basically is a psychological poison. So it's very intriguing how they've decided to try and do this. And I'm really excited for the return of Duncan Idaho, or sort of Duncan Idaho. He's so memorable in Dune, and we don't see him much, but he plays such an important part to other characters and to the furthering and outworking of the story. His actions have significant repercussions to how the story works. He is the loyal sword master and very likable, a lover of many women, but also Paul's best friend. That's why I like Dune Part 1 is another reason why it's my favorite of the two, is because of Duncan Idaho's relationship with Paul. And it makes me that much more excited for Messiah because of the fact that they did establish their deep friendship. That's one of my favorite scenes, is the beginning of Part 1. Paul is confiding in Duncan his dreams and his visions and his misgivings of the future, what's going to happen. I think Jason Momoa did a great job in this scene in particular. And that's a scene that reminded me of what could happen with the character of Hayt, because it kind of evokes that same sort of dialogue and interchanges that we might see, evoke those same sorts of feelings and delivery of lines, I think would be very similar to this. He's telling him about his visions and he's very troubled by them. And what does he say? He says, "Dreams make good stories, but everything important happens when we're awake." And that seems very like Mentat-ish to me, or Zen Sunni philosopher to me. So that's a sort of line delivery I think that we can expect from Jason Momoa moving forward to Messiah. And I'm really excited for that. It makes me that much more appreciative that this scene exists. It's an original scene. And at the time when I did my review of it, I was so happy that this was in here, because even if it's not detailed in the story, the source material does say that he is Paul's best friend. And we see the results of that deep friendship with how Paul acts in certain situations. He's recalling Duncan's lines of mentorship to him, of his guidance. I think during the fight with Jameis, he's recalling what Duncan has said as far as certain strategies. He's recalling that in his head. So his presence and his friendship had a very deep impact on Paul. So I'm very excited for what this means for Messiah, that they've already laid the groundwork for this relationship. That's something that they don't have to really make up for, as opposed to other elements that they do, like the Spacing Guild and Paul and Shawnee's relationship. This one is established already. This is possibly, I would say, the most important relationship to get right in Dune Messiah. Jason Momoa played him well, and of course we know that he will return. I already talked about that one tease. Anya Taylor-Joy and Jason Momoa were at the SNL 50 event, and they snapped a selfie together, and they were both winking. So it was definitely that if you know, you know expressions on their faces. So very excited for his return. And this will be very different in a lot of ways, but I love this particular part of Duncan Idaho's story. This is another example, too, of Frank Herbert just laying out all the cards on the table from the beginning. We know the conspiracy, we know the plot, and the resurrected Duncan Idaho is integral to the plot of taking down Paul Atreides, of poisoning him psychologically, basically to usher in his own self-destruction. And he knows this. That's what's interesting and kind of brilliant in how Frank Herbert tells stories, is that, like Paul Atreides, we know everything. The reader is clued in to the conspiracy, Hayt, what his purpose is, and that Paul knows that. part of Hayt's programming, and this is Hayt, Hayt. He is called this because Golas don't have the memories of their original selves. So he's an entirely new being at this moment. He is, in every other aspect, Duncan Idaho. He is a clone of him, except for his metal eyes. That is something that the Tleilaxu haven't gotten right yet. So they have these metal eyes that they use. So it will be Jason Momoa, and hopefully they'll portray this. They didn't do it for the miniseries, but it would be cool if they did portray those metal eyes. It's supposed to unsettle a lot of characters by looking into a product of the Tleilaxu, who are usually looked upon with revulsion. And so his presence already is looked upon with suspicion and disgust because of his nature. Maybe removing the iris from his eyes, that would be unsettling. This particular iteration of Duncan Idaho looks like him in all respects. Whether or not they're going to do the metal eyes, I don't know. But he doesn't have his original memories. He is conditioned to be a mentat, so he will have those abilities of analytics and logic, but also philosophy. He is a Zensuni philosopher, so that's what he's been trained as. Very different starting out, but how he acts, I mean, this is something that will require some nuance, because it's almost like he's Duncan Idaho in the way he operates with his physical memory. His flesh remembers his past, remembers who he is, but his mind doesn't. So it's very interesting in the progression of his story. But because of him being a mentat, he tells Paul right away that he is the means of his destruction and downfall. So it's definitely very interesting. These interchanges specifically that will occur, it just kind of goes along with what we know already from the conspirators, what they've already said and what they're trying to do. And this is the means for them to do it. There's just no need to hide that from Paul himself, because he does see, while he doesn't know the specifics of the conspiracy, because that's the point of Edric, and hiding that aspect of it, there are elements that he can see around it. As far as his purpose, he can kind of put two and two together. He is, in all respects, in his flesh, that loyal Atreides swordmaster. That's how Golas work in this universe. So he was created by the Bene Tleilax. They break the laws, I guess, of the Orange Catholic Bible in their genetic experimentations and manipulations. No one likes them, but they're useful, especially those Tleilaxu eyes at this time are very useful. I hope they mention the concept that the Tleilaxu always leave at least one opening for their enemy to escape their plans. And that's something that I think could either be established in that opening conspiracy meeting. I think they talk about it then. And then they just mention it again, I think, a couple of times. And I hope they do, because it really will add some depth to the Bene Tleilax as a faction. And I hope they also mention that they themselves created a Kwisatz Haderach, a failed one who destroyed himself. I think that serves as an important part to the plot and the actions Paul takes. Kind of a byproduct of this plan as well is to serve as a distraction for Elia Atreides. That's not their sole purpose for him during this trap, but they know he's an attractive man, so kind of a twofold purpose, because they're trying to take them both down ultimately. They are both Atreides and represent everything that these different factions despise. And it becomes a point of frustration too that he's faced with his nature. This is something that he's struggling with, being the resurrected Duncan, because he doesn't see himself like that, but his flesh remembers it. And sometimes people call him Duncan and he doesn't like that. I think he can pull it off, because that's something that's been a concern. But I think Jason Momoa has the acting chops to do it. I think it all depends on the writing and directing. And this is just really integral to his storyline specifically. And like I said before, I think the delivery, how that scene was handled in part one, I think gives us a tease of what's to come, of what we can expect from Messiah. So I think it will be along those lines of how they talk to each other, but maybe just more without that affection, because he doesn't know that yet. So he's acting as a mentat, as a counselor. He's very honest, but then there will be those glimpses that he has to wrestle with, because ultimately he is the loyal Atreides swordmaster. That is something that cannot be scrubbed away. And as far as lore, I don't think it's as complicated as having to make up for the guild lore, what they're about, what's their motivation, how they operate, how space travel works. They gotta do a lot. But I think people for the most part get it. He's a clone and he doesn't have his memories. They know that it's not the Duncan Idaho they remember. It's just a clone of him. But that's not something that has to have a huge explanation for. I think they handled it very well in part one. We know he fell after eliminating a dozen plus Sardaukar, and they show a beat beetle, which is on the Tleilaxu coat of arms, that's something that was in Paul's vision at the beginning of the movie, that beetle going across the sand. And then we see that later. I think that was an interesting way to tease that there was something more there, that his story didn't end there. They already did themselves a favor by finally doing justice to this character, whose part in this story in previous adaptations was greatly reduced, or some lines just given to other characters. So very excited. It's one of the best parts of part 1, and hopefully will mean one of the best parts of Messiah. But I'm curious to know what you think about the introduction of Hayt and the role of the Bene Tleilax in the story of Dune Messiah. Are you looking forward to Jason Momoa's portrayal of this complex character? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like if you did, and be sure to subscribe for more Dune and other sci-fi and fantasy news, theories, and lore. And if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, you can leave a super thanks or join as a YouTube member for early access to new videos and other perks. You can also check out my Patreon page for exclusive content. Thank you all so much for your support, and as always, have a very nerdy day.